Fort Knox definitely played a huge role in history.
It looks like a prison.
It does look like a prison. From housing gold to housing artifacts to not housing prisoners. It's played an important role, but
they're off in the Kentucky Derby.
Interest of the greater good for me to smoke a joint and calm down.
I am the greatest. He'll fall an eight to prove that I'm great. And if he keeps talking jive, I'm going to cut it to 5.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Village Chillin' Podcast. This week, we talking about gold.
we talking about gold.
We talking about gold, dude.
What? No. Hold on. We're not talking about gold per se. We're talking about the guardians of the gold.
Dude, not the galaxy. Like, they ain't guarding the galaxy. Like, they guarding the gold.
They guarding the gold.
So,
And if you don't know, now you know. We're talking about
Fort Knox.
Yes, sir. Fort Knox. Fort Knox, man. It's a big deal. It's been a big deal in the United States history. It's obviously a big deal for Kentucky history. It's a big deal for us here in Louisville. It's been a big deal in cinema for years. There's a lot of
We talked about that.
We're
talking about it again.
We've talked about a few different movies shot there in the Hollers to Hollywood episode. So check that out. But you got Stripes, you got Goldfinger, you know, little 007 action. It's important, and there's been more there. There's been more mention of it in media, even if it wasn't actually filmed on location. So, pretty damn important aspect, and you know. They got an important job, and something I didn't know until we started looking into it, which I guess I should have known. But when you say Fort Knox, it doesn't actually necessarily mean the bullion dispensary, the gold bullion or the depository. Sorry, the base and the depository are two different things.
Yeah, it's like the whole fort. Like, they're not just talking about like just that specific aspect. They're talking about like everything as far as.
And it just happens to be in the same like city because Fort Knox is its own city in Kentucky. So very different things. If you want to check out Fort Knox, make sure to check out the military website, I guess. There's some specific visitor information, of course, as with any military website. They have a whole welcome to Fort Knox thing with a little bit of the history and some other things. It just kind of touches on it. They have a whole history page too. It's a little harder to follow than Wikipedia, and you know us. We like our Wikipedia. So that's what we're going to run off of today. I'm sure there's a lot more to it. We're missing a lot of things, but we're going to try to hit the major things, right?
Oh yeah.
With that, man, again, Fort Knox is a U.S. Army installation in Kentucky, south of Louisville and north of Elizabethtown, adjacent to the United States Bullion Depository, which the Bullion Depository, the Fort Knox actually, I think, sold or gave land to the depository, which is ran by the U.S. Mint. They even have their own police and everything, but we'll get into that a little later. Fort Knox is a 109,000 acre base covering 3 different counties in Kentucky, being Bullitt, Hardin, and Meade counties.
Dude, you don't want to take like a wrong turn either. Like, anytime like you're in that area, like make sure you know where you're going, and rightfully so.
Make sure when you're trying to go to Tioga Falls, you go to Tioga Falls.
Nope. One wrong turn, dude. They're like, go the other way, and it's like, where am I going?
Yeah. The base itself, or the city, I guess itself, considering it's its own city, is named after Henry Knox, Chief of Artillery in the American Revolutionary War and the first United States Secretary of War. So some pretty big honors there. For 60 years, Fort Knox was the home of the U.S. Army Armor Center and School and was used by both Army and Marine Corps to train crews on the American tanks of the day. The last was the M1 Abrams main battle tank. So there's a lot of history that goes into it. The school ended up moving to Georgia, so it's not here anymore. But the being right next to West Point, West Point, right?
Yeah.
It has its history, and it's still such a prevalent location.
Yeah, you can't get to Fort Knox without like passing West Point.
Well, from Louisville, anyways.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, you have to go through West Point to get to Fort Knox. So, speaking a little bit on the depository, real quick. Again, it was built by the Treasury, with the U.S. Mint in the Treasury, and the gold total is almost 13,000 metric tons, dude. That's crazy.
Dude, it's like that the Irish person, like he's like, I want to know where the gold at, like I don't know. Like,
man, there's been so many. I remember like the first like heist movie I ever saw was it a
was it Goldfinger?
No, it wasn't Goldfinger, dude. That's a little before my time. Die Hard. I feel like the bad guys in Die Hard talked about it because they was attacking the New York money exchange.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure they referenced Fort Knox.
Dude, yeah, like I remember like back in like anytime there was some kind of like military type stuff going on, if you're growing up in Kentucky, everybody's like, dude, they're gonna get Fort Knox. Like that was always like the fear, like, man, like,
which it's funny these days.
We know like there's really no what's the word? Like there's no
basis behind it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, these days.
Once ago, like maybe
the
before the gold standard, maybe like
exactly
we had, like,
when it was a real thing.
Here, but
yeah, there is no gold standard anymore. The money in the U.S. isn't really backed by anything. It's just theoretical. But anyways, yeah. Also on the Fort Knox. The Fort Knox base is the General George Patton Museum of Leadership. So,
George!
It includes an exhibit highlighting leadership issues that arose from the attacks of 9/11, including 2 fire trucks. One of them, designated Foam 161, was partially charred and melted in the attack upon the Pentagon. Fort Knox is also the location of the United States Army's Human Resources Command. Command's Timothy Maude Center of Excellence, which was named in honor of Lieutenant General Timothy Maude, the highest ranking member of the U.S. military to die in the attacks of September 11th. So, and it just speaks to the huge, like, that just kind of speaks to the honor that is brought to the base. It really is an important mainstay. It's an important part of Kentucky history. It's an important part of our state. And we're honored to have Fort Knox here. When people think of Kentucky, outside of thinking hillbillies and bourbon, they usually think Fort Knox.
Yeah.
Which
protected by horses.
Horses and hills, man. Those mountains do a lot to make sure that it is a fortification as we get into that section.
Ayo.
So the original fortifications were constructed near the site in 1861 during the Civil War when Fort Duffield was constructed. Fort Duffield was located on what was known as Muldraw Hill and a strategic point overlooking the confluence of the Salt and Ohio rivers and Louisville and Nashville Turnpike. Area was contested.
Go Cards.
The area was contested by both Union and Confederate forces. Bands of organized guerrillas frequently raided the area during the war. And it says John Hunt Morgan and the 2nd Kentucky Cavalry Regiment of the Confederate Army raided the area before staging his infamous raid across Indiana and Ohio. So the site is pretty important. After the Civil War, in 1903, military maneuvers for the regular army and the National Guards of several states were held at West Point, Kentucky, and the surrounding areas. And in April 1918, field artillery units from Camp Zachary Taylor arrived at West Point for training. And Camp Zachary Taylor is particularly important and interesting because At that time, it was the largest military training camp in the United States, housing 47,500 men. And Camp Zachary Taylor is literally just southeast of downtown Louisville. It's still like it just got taken over by housing, right? You know, it's all the land and everything's still there, and it'd be really cool if like some of the barracks and stuff were still there. I'm sure most of them are, you know, just houses and stuff now, but it's pretty huge. Like for the time, it was the largest military training camp. What's up, everybody? We just wanted to take a quick pause and say, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. Drop us a couple comments. Let us know what you like, what you don't, and let us know what you think about the video. And make sure to share out with your friends and family. It really helps us a lot.
Yeah, we're on every social media platform. We're on every podcast provider out there. So whenever you get a chance, just give us a like, give us a follow. We definitely appreciate it. It really help us out.
And with that, we'll get right back to it.
Yeah.
Well, 1917 too, like that is kind of like the heart of World War One. So for it to be dismantled right after, I guess, like it just wasn't as necessary anymore. But I think that kind of like plants a seed, like I guess we was kind of saying, for why it made sense for.
That's why everything moved to Fort Knox.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And West Point. And I think it's worth mentioning that F. Scott Fitzgerald was stationed at Camp Taylor and mentions it in his novel, The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, that's where he talked about the hot brown, dude. I still think he was trolling. I don't think that's a real thing.
The hot brown's a real thing.
No, well, what, the sandwich?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was drunk.
I don't know what that has to do with it, but anyways, the new camp that was created was named after Henry Knox, the Continental Army Chief of Artillery, which we mentioned earlier. And so right around 1918, the camp was extended when the Army purchased another 40,000 acres in June 1918. It's a lot.
Dude.
A lot of the
And that's during war, too, so that's like inflated prices.
Right, yeah. The building program was reduced following the end of the war and reduced further following cuts to the Army in 1921 after the National Defense Act of 1920. But it's still a permanent training center for Army Reserves, National Guard, and different things like that. So it's still a major landmark as far as military concerns. So not only has it served, of course, you have the bullion depository next door, and then all the other training going on at Fort Knox. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Gettysburg Address were moved to the bullion depository for safekeeping until Major Hatfield ordered their release after D-Day landings.
So Nicholas Cage was right.
In 1931, a small force of the mechanized cavalry was assigned to Camp Knox to use it as a training site. The camp was turned into a permanent garrison in 1932, and that's when it was renamed Fort Knox. So there was a lot of the main use of Fort Knox, at least leading up to World War II and during World War II, was the training of the use of tanks and mechanized cavalry and mechanized wars, and all of the tactics and
steamboats
things that come along with
they
that.
Probably like
I don't think they use steamboats.
But like,
getting on to some of the culture references, yeah. I think it's awesome that
Looney Tunes,
man. Fort Knox appears at the end of Looney Tunes 1952 short 14 Karat Rabbit, where Bugs Bunny tricks Yosemite Sam into attempting to steal the gold from the vault, causing Sam to get arrested.
dude. That's why I didn't see him until Space Jam, dude. Like that's the next time you saw him recurring. That was his last appearance.
Don't think that's true, but it sounds good.
I said it.
The climax of the 1964 James Bond film Goldfinger takes place at Fort Knox, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and we talked about a little more during our Hollers to Hollywood episode. In 1999,
That ended World War One.
not true. In 1999, on the 15th episode of season 5 of Star Trek Voyager, the crew used Fort Knox to refer to its impenetrability and how the Borg is similar. That's pretty huge.
That ended World War Three. Prove it wrong.
That specifically speaks to the nature of how Fort Knox and specifically the gold depository is built, though. The fact that they took a show, in
It's withstand
1999.
in the future. Like
Yeah.
they know it's still lasting.
Exactly. The American show Ghost Hunters filmed at Fort Knox in 2011. In 2012, SpongeBob SquarePants mentioned Fort Knox. Pinky and the Brain, dude. I have one of those hats too. I don't know if anybody can see, but I'm wearing a Bugs Bunny hat. So that was reference to the other one earlier. But I have a Pinky and the Brain hat too. And Pinky and the Brain tried to steal the gold at Fort Knox. They're just too little.
They're
like-
trying to take over the world, and like that tells you a lot. Like they're like, we'll just fucking take over.
That's probably why the whole world was scared that if war broke out, they were going to come for the gold at Fort Knox. It was because of Pinky and the Brain.
Man.
Or maybe Pinky and the Brain came after all the conspiracy theories. I don't know. Either way.
What came first, Pinky or the Brain?
Good question, dude. Another interesting thing is Samsung Knox security software is named in reference to the bullion vault at Fort Knox.
Dude, I used to sell phones. That's why I tell people like they used to be like paranoid because like putting their like card information on it. I'm like, dude, if you're using Samsung, it's Knox security, Fort Knox.
It's
and-
Knox. I remember having to bypass Knox when I rooted a couple phones.
Well, you're not supposed to do that, okay?
Yeah, you're not. I'm not advocating
Like,
for it. I'm
that's-
just saying it was possible back then.
Okay, speaking of System of the Down.
System of the Down, dude. The song BYOB mentions Fort Knox. Fort Knox is also mentioned in Fallout 76.
Hey,
And-
don't keep it going, dude. System of Down BYOB, dude. Like that is
It's
And then
good, but Fallout 76 is like almost even more relevant today because the Fallout show just came out on Amazon Prime.
go on.
I wonder if they mentioned Fort Knox during the show is all I'm saying. I don't know. I haven't watched it. I also haven't played Fallout 76. Opening scenes of Penguins of Madagascar takes place at Fort Knox. And then there we are. Fort Knox is mentioned several times by the villains and Die Hard with a Vengeance as they break into the gold vaults under Wall Street. It's the one I was referencing earlier. The General George Patton Museum of Leadership. It is publicly accessible museum on Fort Knox. And just make sure, again, to make sure you know where you're going. Check it out. Get directions.
Dude, don't get the wrong spot because like they will yell at you, dude. Like sometimes they'll do the traffic where they're like telling you to like they'll tell you to like stop, but they say come forward and you don't know what to do.
The museum entry is free and open to the public Tuesday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., excluding federal
Eastern
holidays,
Standard Time.
of course. I think most people would know that considering the museum is in Eastern Standard Time.
Dude, you from California, you don't know where you're coming from.
You're at least coming through to the Eastern time zone. Anyways, moving on.
Well, if you're in Louisville, Kentucky, go on.
Some major, and just to recap,
Conspiracy theories.
there's not that many conspiracy theories
There's a
about
lot.
it.
He's
However,
lying.
the vault itself is said to house 147.3 million ounces of gold. That's a lot. It's a book value of $6.22 billion. That's not a lot when you consider the amount of currency that's floating around. Much of the gold in the vault is in the form of 27-pound bars, while a percentage is in gold coins.
Yeah, that's at least half a Giza.
So there's conspiracy saying that the gold isn't actually at Fort Knox.
Well, no, yeah. All the stuff we was talking about before in that first question was just all hypothetical. There's not actually gold there. No, it's just
No, it's tungsten bars painted to look gold.
It's a theoretical.
Outsiders actually rarely get into the vault, and even like presidents don't get into the vault. It's kind of crazy how restricted they have it. The U.S. Mint Police are pretty damn serious, and it's pretty hard to get into the vault. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and Treasury Secretary Steve.
Mitch McConnell, the turtle, Frankfurt.
Yep. In 2017, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin led a rare visit by outsiders to peek at the gold reserves inside the Fort Knox vault. He was accompanied by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and the two of them were photographed holding gold bars. Before that, it was 40 years earlier that the vault was opened. So it's definitely very few and far between when they actually let people get in there. Only one U.S. president has ever stepped foot, and that was Franklin Roosevelt after it was built.
He opened it. Like, that don't
Pretty
count.
much, yeah.
It's not his fault.
Fort Knox contains 4,200 cubic yards of concrete, 16,000 cubic feet of granite, 750 tons of reinforced steel, and 670 tons of structural steel. Cost of construction in the 1930s was about $560,000. That's a lot. Like
Dude.
today's standards, that's in the millions.
That's a lot of scrap.
Fort Knox is guarded by members of the U.S. Mint Police, one of the oldest federal law enforcement agencies, established in 1792. It's older than the FBI, older than the CIA, older than the U.S. Marshals.
What were they patrolling?
They were just protecting the gold, man. Protecting
Before
the
the gold? Like, they were like, I know there's going to be gold here one day. Like, we're just waiting.
They were just protecting the capital, man. I don't know. Protecting the currency exchanges. I don't know. Formed in 1792, though. That's pretty crazy. The officers undergo 12 weeks of basic training, followed by 5 weeks of field training. They learn a long list of heavy-duty skills, including weapons handling, cornering, door entry, and room clearing. So they definitely go through a lot, and they have to, I mean, the thing is, like, as a kid, when I always heard about Fort Knox, I always assumed Fort Knox was guarded by the Army, right? It's a freaking Army base. It's not. Fort Knox is guarded by the U.S. Mint Police. So in 1939, one of the original copies of the Magna Carta, the medieval English charter laying down basic human rights, was brought to the U.S. to go on exhibit at the New York World's Fair. When World War II erupted, the delicate document was transferred to Fort Knox for safekeeping. The Magna Carta stayed in residence until 1947 when it went back to England. Oh, man. We also housed the crown for King Koloman, Hungary's King Koloman, during World War II. We housed that and several other pretty important artifacts. So, Fort Knox definitely played a huge role in history.
It looks like a prison.
It does look like a prison. From housing gold to housing artifacts to not housing prisoners. It's played an important role. But with that, we will see y'all next time.
They're off in the Kentucky Derby.
Interest of the greater good for me to smoke a joint and calm down.
I am the greatest. He'll fall an ace to prove that I'm great. And if he keeps talking jive, I'm going to cut it to 5.